Thanks to At Home for joining us this hour. Happy Monday. Thanks for being here. There's a lot going on tonight, and there's a lot going on coming up. So I just want to jump right in. Let's go. First, let's get out our calendars because we have to make some changes. See, next week in your calendar on Friday, where it says, and you've had written in there for a long time, that that's the day the president's campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, is going to be sentenced to federal prison. I know you have had that date penciled in your calendar for a long time now. Paul Manafort's sentencing in Virginia for multiple felonies. Friday, February 8th, next Friday. That's been on the docket forever. Turns out it's good you only wrote that in pencil because now you have to either erase it or at least messily exit out, because the sentencing of the president's campaign chair was called off today by the famously cantankerous judge who oversees Manafort's case in Virginia. Although that Virginia trial is over and Manafort was convicted at that trial of 8 felonies, and that Virginia court famously likes to get stuff done fast with no delays. That's the court, that's the so-called rocket docket. Despite all of that, the sentencing of the president's campaign chair, which had been sentenced for next week, next Friday, that is now indefinitely on hiatus. It's indefinitely delayed. The problem is that the whole sentencing process for Paul Manafort has now been complicated by these new allegations from special counsel Robert Mueller that Manafort breached his plea deal and lied to prosecutors after he agreed to cooperate with them. That specific issue, which Manafort is now facing, the question of whether or not he lied to prosecutors, that is going to be the subject of a court hearing for him next week in D.C., actually a week from today, on Monday, February 4th. That hearing, you should probably put in your calendar if you don't have it there already, because that one may ultimately be the whole enchilada for Paul Manafort. I mean, depending on the outcome of that hearing as to whether or not he lied to prosecutors, he could be looking at an additional decade in prison on top of the 7 to 10 years he is already likely facing for what happened in Virginia, whenever they finally decide that they're going to go ahead with sentencing him in Virginia. Again, as of today, the Virginia sentencing is off. Monday's hearing on whether or not he lied to prosecutors is on. But that's going to be held behind closed doors. We're not going to know what happened at that hearing on Monday until well after the fact. The reason they are apparently sealing that next crucial hearing for the president's campaign chair is because we believe his case still relates to a bunch of sensitive matters and other ongoing investigations. Again, though, we can't see that because it's all been happening under seal. We probably will not know the whole truth of that for quite some time. But those dates have changed. And now that the Manafort sentencing is off for the end of next week, you should have a little space in your calendar on that day. That same day, Friday of next week, you can now write in this. Michael Cohen, the president's longtime personal lawyer, will be testifying that day to the House Intelligence Committee under their new Democratic chairman, Congressman Adam Schiff. But again, that testimony from Michael Cohen will also be held behind closed doors, so we, the public, won't get to see it. Most Intelligence Committee witnesses in the Russia investigation have appeared in closed session behind closed doors. That will be true of Michael Cohen next week at Intel. That said, we are still waiting to find out when and where and under what circumstances Michael Cohen might do open public testimony that we can all listen in on and see. Late last week, Cohen tried to back out of his commitment to appear in a public hearing before a different committee, before Democratic Chairman Elijah Cummings and the House Oversight Committee. Mr. Cohen backed out of that appearance last week on the grounds that he and his family felt threatened by and intimidated by the president because of the president's public remarks about that forthcoming testimony. Chairman Cummings and the Democrats seem to believe that they're going to get Michael Cohen publicly testifying in some way, somehow. But we don't know when that will be. And the clock is ticking because Michael Cohen is due to report to federal prison on March 7th. Now, incidentally, Michael Cohen today dumped his whole legal team, which I didn't see coming. And maybe that's related to the start of his forthcoming prison sentence. Maybe that's related to these ongoing negotiations about public testimony to Congress or closed-door testimony to Congress. Until today, Cohen's legal team had been led by a lawyer named Guy Petrillo, Guy Petrillo is very well connected in the federal prosecutor's office in Manhattan, in the Southern District of New York. That's the prosecutor's office that charged Cohen and convicted Cohen, or secured a guilty plea from Cohen for 8 felonies, including campaign finance felonies, in which prosecutors said that the president was also personally implicated. That was all SDNY. So it made sense that Cohen had picked as his defense lawyer Guy Petrillo, because Guy Petrillo used to be the head of the criminal division at SDNY. Right? You think about the strategy on these things, even if you're not a lawyer and you've never been charged with anything, you can see the logic here. If you're being prosecuted by SDNY, it's probably not a bad idea to have on your side a guy who used to run the criminal division at that prosecutor's office. That is how Cohen got Petrillo in the first place. But now, as of today, with Michael Cohen preparing to go to prison and apparently negotiating these potential appearances before various congressional committees, now today, he has dropped Guy Petrillo and he has announced new lawyers. A couple of new guys who've never been involved in his case before at all. A couple of guys from Chicago. And again, we do not know the exact reason for the switch. Nobody's quite sure why Michael Cohen dumped his old lawyers, or if we should expect something unexpected from Michael Cohen because he's got these new lawyers. But this late in the game, with the client already convicted and on his way to prison, I mean, one perhaps reasonable guess as to what is driving this decision might be a word that rhymes with honey and starts with Those sort of things sometimes arrive at this point in a criminal case. But it's interesting, that same day that Michael Cohen is due next week to testify behind closed doors to the Intelligence Committee, Friday next week, there is also going to be public testimony that day before Democratic Chairman Jerry Nadler and the House Judiciary Committee. There's going to be public testimony that day from Matthew Whitaker, who is the Trump-appointed acting attorney general at the Justice Department right now. Now, Matt Whitaker was never confirmed by the Senate. He also rejected ethics advice from the Justice Department, in which he was instructed or advised that he should recuse himself from any oversight role in the Mueller investigation. He rejected that advice, did not recuse himself. Matt Whitaker is a hugely controversial figure as acting attorney general for a whole bunch of different reasons. Today, though, ahead of this public testimony he's about to give next week, today he appears to have really stepped in it. Today there was a press briefing about the Justice Department bringing criminal charges against a behemoth Chinese cell phone maker. And at the press briefing announcing those charges, Acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker was asked about the status of the Mueller investigation. And again, this is a sensitive subject for him, right? He has this long record of public comments criticizing the Mueller investigation. He was appointed to this job by President Trump. There's every indication that the reason President Trump appointed him to this job is because of that long record of public statements criticizing the Mueller investigation. Whitaker was never confirmed by the Senate. He got ethics advice from career ethics officials at the department that he should recuse from being involved in the Mueller investigation. He didn't follow that advice. So it's an incredibly sensitive subject when it comes to Whitaker. But regardless of what you think of Matt Whitaker, regardless of what you think of him being in this job as it relates to the Mueller investigation, regardless of all of that, if you are anybody who works at the Justice Department, in any position of authority at the Justice Department, rule 1 of that particular Fight Club is that you do not talk about that particular Fight Club. As a Justice Department official, you do not talk about open and ongoing investigations. That's like day 1 of Justice Department orientation. It's an open investigation, ixnay on the awking tay. Don't talk about it. I mean, even if you're not Matthew Whitaker, the most controversial figure in the middle of this incredibly important investigation at the Justice Department, even if you're not him, you do not do this. Particularly if you're him, you do not do this. Particularly if you're him and you're due to testify publicly before Congress, who is itching to get at you on this subject, you do not do this. And the fact that he shouldn't have done this appears to dawn on him in the middle of these remarks. Watch.
Before you came into your current role, you were publicly very critical of the special counsel investigation. Now, since you have received your briefings, is there anything that you've seen or read that gives you concern about special counsel Robert Mueller or his investigation? You know, I've been fully briefed on the investigation, and, I look forward to Director Mueller delivering the final report. And
I really am not going to talk about open and ongoing investigation otherwise, but, sort of the statements that I made were as a private citizen, only with publicly available information. And I am comfortable that the decisions that were made are going to be reviewed, either through the various means we have. But right now, the investigation is, I think, close to being completed, and I hope that we can get the report from Director Mueller as soon as possible.
That's all we have time for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so. Okay, we got to. Let's cut this. Can we just get this? Can we? I mean, whatever you think of Matthew Whitaker as acting Attorney General, nobody at the Justice Department is supposed to talk about ongoing investigations at all. I am comfortable that the decisions that were made are going to be reviewed, either through the various means we have, but right now, the investigation is, I think, close to being completed. And I hope that we can get the report from Director Mueller as soon as possible. You can tell Matt Whitaker just remembered that he's not supposed to opine on this investigation or sort of wax ineloquent on this investigation. You can tell that dawns on him in the middle of those remarks because of the giant soup bowl of hot sweat that breaks out on his head and his face in the middle of him making those remarks when his words start to fail him. And at this point, nobody knows if he said the Mueller investigation is wrapping up because the Mueller investigation is wrapping up and he knows that. Or perhaps he doesn't know that, but he's heard that, and so he's passing on what he believes is common wisdom. It's also possible that he just blurted that out in a panic, which honestly is what it most looked like on his face at the moment. He barely strung those words together before the whole thing was called to an end very quickly by the Justice Department spokeswoman. So who knows what that meant? But he shouldn't be talking about an open and ongoing investigation, regardless of what it is he thinks he might want to try to blurt out about it. Those remarks from the acting attorney general caused a major stir today. Honestly, nobody really knows what they might mean. On your calendar, though, you should note that that same official, Matt Whitaker, is due to testify publicly next week on Friday before Democratic Chairman Jerry Nadler and the Judiciary Committee. I am sweating right now just thinking about it. I'm hoping that everybody will bring along a little helper to help them mop their brows so that there isn't a tripping hazard by the time we're all done in that hearing room. I also think, though, this is pure speculation, I think we should also be open to the possibility that that public testimony from Matthew Whitaker might get called off. Again, it is scheduled for next week, Friday. But Matthew Whitaker is only the acting attorney general right now. There is a nominee to become the actual Attorney General, confirmed by the Senate. We're going to have a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee here in just a moment. That Judiciary Committee's vote on William Barr to be Attorney General is scheduled for tomorrow. If that vote, in fact, happens tomorrow, and if William Barr wins that vote and gets voted out of committee, again, just thinking about your calendar for the next week or so, if the Judiciary Committee votes tomorrow to confirm William Barr to be Attorney General, it would probably be this time next week. It would probably be early next week that they would give him a full vote on the Senate floor. So if everything went his way and those votes happened as scheduled and expected, William Barr could be voted out of committee tomorrow. He could be confirmed by the Senate and sworn in as the new Attorney General in early next week. Could be a week from tomorrow. If that happens and we get a new Senate confirmed sworn in Attorney General as of next week, that would mean Matthew Whitaker, hyperventilating Matthew Whitaker, will no longer be acting Attorney General. And if that happened, do you think this relaxed, self-assured man who we saw melting down before the cameras today, do you think he would keep his date with the Democratic-led House Judiciary Committee that wants to ask him lots of really, really hard questions in public session before all the cameras? I mean, if you were him and you were no longer serving as acting Attorney General, would you keep that date? Or would you come up with an excuse? We shall see. You should factor into your calculation that we also just found out today that the new date for the State of the Union is Tuesday of next week, a week from tomorrow. So you can see how this timing may be coming together, right? If they get a Judiciary Committee vote to confirm William Barr tomorrow, that would probably mean they'd get a Senate vote to confirm Barr as Attorney General a week from tomorrow. That would mean they could swear him in a week from tomorrow. If they can time that for a week from tomorrow, for Tuesday, That would give President Trump something like normal president seeming for him to brag about at the State of the Union that night. I'd like to thank the Senate for confirming my Attorney General nominee. Yay. That would also give Matthew Whitaker a convenient opportunity in the middle of all the State of the Union news hoopla to quietly announce that he is sadly no longer available to testify in public session now that he's no longer acting Attorney General. Besides, he has an urgent appointment with a cold compress and a fan. And he'd be happy to talk to you some other time. And the reason you should know all of that stuff is on the horizon for the next few days is because tomorrow is going to be a little bit nuts. Tomorrow is going to be a little bit nuts all day long. First of all, in the morning, there's going to be the formal arraignment of President Trump's longtime political advisor, Republican gadfly Roger Stone. He was arrested in Florida on Friday. He had his first court appearance in Florida in federal court on Friday, but he is being charged in Washington, D.C., and he will be arraigned in D.C. federal court for the first time tomorrow. Now, if you're looking for a sign of how that's likely to go, as of late this afternoon, Mr. Stone's legal team had forgotten to apply to the court in D.C. for his lawyers to be able to represent him there. His lawyers have to make that sort of an application because neither of them is formally admitted to the bar in D.C. And it's not an unheard of situation. It's easy enough to ask the court's permission to get around that as a legal issue. But the fact that Roger Stone's lawyers had not even bothered to file the relevant paperwork by close of business today, and the judge needed to remind them that they needed to file that paperwork before tomorrow's arraignment, and then when they did file the paperwork at the last minute today, they filed it wrong, and the judge still rejected it, and so still Roger Stone's lawyers are not approved to represent him in court tomorrow, and they've got a 9 a.m. deadline. He's due to be arraigned at 11 a.m., and this is still not sorted out even now. That is not a good sign for Roger Stone's legal team and for Roger Stone's criminal case getting to be any less of a circus anytime soon. But again, I'm telling you, tomorrow's going to be nuts. That Roger Stone arraignment is scheduled for 11 a.m. Eastern time in D.C. federal court. Who knows who's going to be representing him?
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.